in the dim half-light of a winter morning on the Eastern Front. The air hangs heavy with frost, thick enough that every breath feels like shards of glass slipping into the lungs. You can almost hear it. The quiet groan of metal contracting, the distant rumble of artillery echoing off frozen ruins, and the soft clatter of a weapon you don't recognize. It's flat. It's stamped. It folds like a piece of scrap iron. And yet, somehow, every time it fires, it never stutters. If you were standing there, boots sinking into brown slush, fingers numb inside wool gloves, you'd notice something strange. German soldiers watching their enemy with a kind of reluctant admiration. Because in a war defined by mud and ice, the weird little Soviet PPS-43 is starting to prove itself as the one gun that simply refuses to die. We begin with the moment this odd weapon first appears on the front lines just before its legend begins. Snow covers everything in a pale, heavy blanket, muting the battlefield and hiding its dangers. Long rows of ruined buildings rise like broken teeth along the edge of the Leningrad suburbs. The air feels thick with smoke, cold mist, and the constant taste of metal. Soviet infantry move carefully through these empty streets, boots crunching softly on snow crust, their breath rolling upward in slow white clouds. Among them is something new, something that does not look like it belongs in a war. It is flat, made of thin, stamped steel, and shaped more like a folding tool than a weapon. From a distance, it almost resembles a piece of factory scrap welded into the form of a gun. Yet the soldiers carry it with confidence, as if its odd appearance hides something important. The weapon is the PPS-43, a submachine gun created in the pressure of the siege. The city is starving, factories barely run, and supplies vanish as fast as they arrive. Soviet engineers need something simple, fast to build, and strong enough to work in freezing chaos. The PPS-43 becomes the answer. Its frame demands little machining, only sheet steel and a few welds. It even feels light in the hands, almost too light for its purpose. But the troops seem pleased with it. They move through the ruins as if this awkward shape is already familiar. The Germans on the opposite side of these streets first notice the strange silhouette during short firefights across alleys and abandoned tram tracks. In the early moments, it is just a curiosity, a gun that looks like no other. German squads are used to facing the PPSH-41, with its round drum magazines and heavy wooden stock. That weapon has a strong presence, a large shape that matches the powerful bursts it fires. But this new one looks smaller, more compact, and almost fragile. A few German riflemen assume it must be a desperation weapon, something put together from leftover metal because the Soviets have nothing else left to build. Then they start hearing it. The PPS-43 fires in short, steady bursts that cut cleanly through the cold air. It has a sharp rhythm, not a sputter, not a stutter, but a controlled chain of rapid shots. When mud splashes onto it, it keeps firing. When snow melts across the bolt, it still works. When the temperature crashes below freezing and rifles jam from ice crystals gathering in moving parts, the stamped little gun shows no sign of fatigue. German troops begin to rethink their assumptions. This strange object is not weak at all. It is efficient, fast, and unbothered by the conditions around it. Soviet units use the new gun during patrols that push through narrow passages between collapsed buildings. Its short length makes it easier to turn quickly, easier to lift into firing position, and easier to control during sudden close-quarters fighting. When German scouts press forward, they sometimes catch a brief glimpse of a folding stock snapping open as a Soviet soldier prepares for an ambush. The shape is unmistakable. Flat top, sharp angles, magazine hanging from the bottom like a metal tooth. Germans report this new weapon in their field notes, describing it as odd but effective. Most do not know its name, only its behavior. Within days, frontline stories spread quietly through German units, holding positions near the Neva River. Soldiers talk about how the Soviets managed to keep firing in heavy snowstorms when others cannot. They mention the weapon's simple outline and the confidence with which the enemy uses it. In these stories, the gun is more than a tool. It becomes a symbol of adaptability in a brutal climate. Men who carry Kar-9, 8K rifles and MP-42s begin to wonder what it would feel like to hold something so light and so resistant to failure. Meanwhile, Soviet troops treat the PPS-43 with an almost practical affection. They wipe it down quickly, fold it neatly during marches, and appreciate how it fits easily against the body. Some tie it with cloth straps to keep it steady during long winter crawls. The gun's straight lines and stamped surfaces seem to shrug off the cold in a way that heavier wooden stock weapons cannot. As the Soviets push against German outposts near frozen canals and half-buried trenches, the PPS-43 becomes a common sight. There is a moment during a skirmish on the edge of Pulkovo Heights that changes German perception completely. A squad of German panzer grenadiers holds a position inside the remains of a two-story warehouse. Snowstorm winds rattle sheets of broken metal hanging from the roof. Visibility is low, and everything feels tense. The Germans expect a normal Soviet attack with rifles and PPSH submachine guns, but instead, a small group moves in with rapid precision. One soldier leans around a brick corner, lifting the flat little gun, and fires through drifting snow with almost no recoil. The Germans feel the pressure immediately. They dive behind crates and machine parts, sensing their equipment struggle in the cold, while the new Soviet guns continue as if unaffected. After the fight ends, the Germans gather themselves and try to piece together what they witnessed. Some pick up spent 7.6 2x25mm casings, lying in the snow, their brass still warm. Others whisper about the strange folding weapon and how it allowed the enemy to move with surprising speed. A few wonder whether this simple design might spread across the entire Soviet army. The idea unsettles them. If the enemy can build something so effective with so little material, what else might follow? Back on the Soviet side, word travels that the PPS-43 production will increase. Commanders want more of them because they understand the value of a weapon that does not demand constant care. Workshops inside the besieged city work through the night, stamping metal sheets under dim lights, powered by unreliable generators. Each finished gun leaves the factory with no polish, no decoration, only raw function. By the end of winter, the PPS-43 is no longer a curiosity. It is a part of the landscape, lean, cold, and built for the environment. German troops begin watching for its silhouette, knowing it signals trouble in close-range fights. The stage is set for something unexpected, rising interest from the very soldiers who are meant to fear it. The first pull toward admiration, and even desire. The first real shift begins in the forests south of Leningrad, where the fighting turns chaotic and close. Snow still covers the ground, but patches of mud appear where tank tracks have churned the earth. German patrols move carefully between pine trunks darkened by smoke and winter frost. Most carry MP-42s slung over their shoulders, metal cold enough to sting through gloves. The MP-40 is familiar, dependable in warm months. Ice gathers inside the action, and mud splashes onto its surfaces, making it slower to respond at critical moments. Across a shallow ravine, Soviet scouts move with the same quiet determination. They carry the PPS-43 folded flat against their chests, the stock tucked neatly into the body. The contrast between the two weapons becomes obvious during a sudden clash near fallen logs and shattered tree branches. The Germans try to fire first, but the cold delays some of their weapons. The Soviets respond instantly. The PPS-43 opens with sharp bursts that slice through the still air. It feels almost unfairly quick, the shots arriving before the Germans can fully react. Men dive for cover, confused by how easily the enemy maneuvers in such tight spaces. Moments like this ripple through German units along the front. Soldiers talk about them during evening rest periods, inside dugouts lined with frozen planks. They mention how the flat Soviet gun seems to keep working when everything else gets stiff with ice. No one knows its exact name yet, but the descriptions repeat over and over. A folding stock that locks in place with a metallic click. A barrel that never seems to mind being dragged through snow. Soon, rumors of the strange weapon spread faster than official reports. The next turning point arrives during a long patrol through abandoned farmsteads near Mga. German infantry move between collapsed barns and half-buried wagons, their breath forming steady fog around their heads. The temperature falls again, and the familiar problem returns. Thick frost creeping into the MP-42's moving parts. A few soldiers check their bolts repeatedly, hoping to keep them from freezing. They do not expect trouble, only routine scouting. But the Soviets are waiting. Shots erupt from behind a tilted wooden fence, where two Soviet riflemen crouch with PPs-43 resting on the boards. They fire short, controlled bursts, their shots landing exactly where they intend. The Germans return fire, but they face a delay, small, only seconds, yet enough to shift the balance. When the clash ends, a few Germans examine the snow, noticing casings and footprints left behind. The impression sticks with them. That realization begins to sting. German supply officers hear unofficial requests for captured Soviet guns. Some soldiers try to barter for them, while others offer rations or cigarettes to anyone who brings one back from a skirmish. A few believe it could help them survive winter patrols, while others simply trust what they see, a weapon that does not jam under pressure. What starts as curiosity begins turning into motivation, pushing some to act beyond official approval. This growing interest becomes even stronger during a battle around a frozen rail line. German grenadiers take cover behind railcars tipped sideways, their metal frames shaking each time artillery slams into the nearby track. The Germans shoot through the gaps whenever silhouettes appear in the distance, but their weapons struggle again, their metal contracting in the cold. One soldier slams his MP-40 forward, trying to clear a jam. The moment delays their defense. From behind a collapsed rail shed, a Soviet assault team moves forward with the PPS-43. The gun's compact shape lets them slip between beams quickly, shifting position without catching on debris. They fire small bursts and then move again, using the weapon's light weight to maneuver faster than expected. The Germans feel the pressure as they struggle to keep up. Afterward, they talk among themselves about how the flat little gun allowed the Soviets to advance with speed that seemed almost unnatural in such tight quarters. Word spreads to platoon leaders, then company commanders. Officers begin carrying notebooks filled with battlefield observations. Some note the weapon's rate of fire. Others write about how easily Soviet troops transition from close-range ambush to retreat without losing rhythm. There is a growing sense that this weapon is no longer just unusual. It might be shaping the fight itself. The reality is uncomfortable. Germany's industrial strength and engineering reputation mean little when winter strips away advantages and exposes weakness. During a quiet evening, in a frontline trench, a German corporal examines an empty magazine left behind after a Soviet withdrawal. He notices how simple it looks, how easily it could be produced in a factory with limited resources. If the Soviets can create something this effective with such basic materials, then they have solved a problem the Germans keep running into. He wonders what other designs they might develop from the same logic. Tension continues growing across the front. German soldiers whisper about the gun's folding stock and how it helps during long marches. Others mention seeing Soviets fire, even after crawling through mud-soaked fields. The difference becomes harder to ignore each day. Slowly, quietly, admiration transforms into desire. Men begin to think about how this weapon might help them survive their next patrol, their next ambush, their next winter storm. Winter returns with a deeper cruelty than the year before. The Eastern Front freezes into a long maze of white fields, cracked earth, and forests pressed flat under heavy snow. Wind sweeps across everything in hard, icy waves, carrying stinging crystals that scrape against exposed skin. Any movement feels slow, heavy, and exhausting. Soldiers on both sides struggle to keep weapons warm enough to function, but nature seems determined to swallow metal and flesh alike. German infantry dig into shallow trenches covered with crude wooden planks. Their MP-42s rest beside them, metal stiff from frost despite constant wiping. The cold forces them to check their bolts every few minutes, tapping them lightly, hoping to keep them from locking in place. When the wind grows stronger, ice forms even faster, settling into tiny cracks where oil once kept parts smooth. Rifles and machine guns suffer too, reacting slowly or failing outright during critical moments. On the Soviet side, things are not easier. Supplies are short, boots leak water, and long marches through snow drain every ounce of strength. Yet one object seems unaffected. The PPS-43 hangs across the chest of many soldiers, like a metal extension of their body. Its simple stamped frame refuses to hold ice. Its open bolt design sheds snow each time it fires, and its lightweight makes movement less tiring. Soviet troops notice these small advantages and trust them, especially when bigger and heavier weapons fail in the freezing dark. The difference becomes clear during a night patrol near a frozen riverbed. German troops move carefully through narrow paths carved by earlier footsteps. Every sound echoes across the open ice, making the patrol tense and slow. A few try to warm their weapons with gloved hands, but the cold pushes back immediately. Their boots crunch over thin layers of frost, revealing their position with each step. On the opposite side of the river, Soviet scouts crouch among fallen branches. They keep their PPS-43s tucked under their coats to protect them from the wind. As soon as movement appears on the riverbank, the Soviets lift the guns without hesitation. They fire controlled bursts that light up the snow for brief moments. The Germans attempt to return fire, but some of their weapons jam or hesitate, delaying the response long enough for the Soviets to slip back into the darkness. Reports reach German platoons describing how Soviet submachine guns remain reliable, even in temperatures that crack wooden stocks. German officers note how often firefights begin with the Soviets firing first, catching the Germans still struggling to clear stiff bolts. Patterns emerge, and they are difficult to ignore. The PPS-43 is proving itself in ways that cannot be denied. The harsh winter also brings long-range patrol missions through silent forests. German scouts travel through chest-high snowdrifts, trying to spot Soviet positions hidden behind white-covered trees. Visibility is low, and frost creates ghost-like shapes among branches. During these missions, weight becomes a serious burden. The MP-40 is heavier than it seems when carried for hours, and its oil thickens in the cold, slowing the action even more. Soviet patrols move with slightly more ease. Their PPS-43s weigh less, making it possible to walk longer distances without losing energy. When both sides collide unexpectedly in these snow-filled woods, the difference shows again. The Soviet guns fire quickly during sudden ambushes, while the Germans often need precious seconds to bring their weapons back into functioning order. Those seconds decide who lives and who falls in the snow. One memorable engagement happens near a burned-out village buried under layers of frost. The ghostly frames of cottages stand crooked, their roofs collapsed under snow. A German machine gun team sets up behind a fallen beam, waiting for Soviet movement. Ice has formed in the feed mechanism, despite hours of preparation. Before they can fix it, Soviet soldiers rush forward between the ruined houses, PPS-43s, firing steadily, even as snow blasts across their faces. The Germans retreat, carrying their jammed gun with frustration and disbelief. Inside nearby dugouts, German soldiers talk quietly about how the Soviets keep firing through storms that should cripple all weapons. They mention the simple design of the PPS-43 and how it seems built for these exact conditions. The weapon's lack of unnecessary parts becomes an advantage, allowing it to shrug off cold and mud where more complex designs fail. Some Germans now regret not capturing a PPS-43 earlier. Others openly wish for one, convinced it would make a difference in these impossible conditions. One German sergeant, exhausted from repeated patrols, picks up a captured PPS-43 after a skirmish. He turns it in his hands surprised by how light it feels. The folding stock opens smoothly, even in freezing air. He tests the bolt, finding it clear and responsive. The realization settles heavily in his mind. This gun simply works, regardless of cold, mud, or exhaustion. He looks at his own weapon and feels a quiet sense of frustration. Across the front, more Germans begin carrying captured PPs. 43 seconds. Some use them during night defenses, others during forest patrols or urban skirmishes. A few officers notice and try to enforce regulations. But winter does not care about regulations. Survival pushes soldiers toward choices they might not make in calmer seasons. The PPS-43 becomes a lifeline for many who would otherwise face the cold with unreliable equipment. By the end of the harshest months, the truth is clear to both sides. The stamped Soviet gun is not only unusual, it is perfectly shaped for this environment. Its simple construction, light frame, and resistance to freezing give it an undeniable edge. The winter has proven everything, and the desire among German troops grows even stronger. As the winter slowly loosens its grip, the snow begins to melt into thick, heavy mud that swallows boots and fills trenches with icy water. The front lines shift again, pressing soldiers into new positions around forests, rail tracks, and ruined villages. German infantry try to reorganize after months of harsh fighting, but something unexpected rises to the surface. Too many of them now carry the same unusual weapon. The flat Soviet submachine gun, with its stamped frame and folding stock, appears again and again in German hands, tucked beneath coats or hidden inside dugouts. At first it was rare, something taken during desperate fights. Small unit commanders begin noticing the pattern during inspections. They ask why their soldiers are carrying enemy guns, and the answers are always the same. The PPS-43 simply works. Most German weapons require careful cleaning, careful warming, and constant attention to keep them functioning in mud and frost. Troops trust it because they have lived through nights where their own guns froze while the Soviet ones kept firing. Officers understand this logic, but they also feel uneasy. A German army relying on Soviet guns sends a message no one wants to admit. The tension grows when ammunition confusion becomes a real problem. The PPS-43 uses 7.6 2x25mm rounds, not the 9mm cartridges used by German submachine guns. During fast firefights, some soldiers reach for the wrong ammunition pouches, only to discover a mismatch. After-action reports mention these mistakes, and higher-ranking officers react quickly. Orders come down, warning soldiers not to use captured weapons unless absolutely necessary. They fear casualties caused not by enemy fire, but by simple confusion under pressure. To them, surviving the next patrol matters more than regulations printed hundreds of kilometers behind the lines. The PPS-43 becomes a quiet symbol of the gap between those who fight in the mud and those who issue rules from warm headquarters. Soldiers continue to hide Soviet guns under blankets during inspections, or bury them in snow piles only to retrieve them later. It becomes a small rebellion, driven by experience instead of defiance. This growing disconnect draws the attention of high command. Officers conduct surprise inspections on trenches and front positions. When they find PPS-43 seconds lying next to German helmets, they react with sharp frustration. Some confiscate the weapons immediately, piling them into crates and sending them to supply depots for evaluation. Others demand explanations from their units, writing reports about lax discipline or improper equipment use. These moments create a tense atmosphere among the troops. They feel exposed, not because of the enemy, but because their survival tools are now treated as contraband. However, confiscation brings new trouble. When Soviet assaults hit suddenly across fog-covered fields or narrow forest paths, German soldiers with assigned weapons experience the same problems as before. Their guns jam at the worst moments, their firing rates slow, and their ability to react quickly drops. After several close calls and unnecessary losses, frustration turns into open argument. Soldiers complain to their sergeants that the confiscation of PPS-43 seconds puts their lives at risk. Some even plead quietly for their weapons to be returned. One evening, in a muddy trench south of Lake Ladoga, a German platoon gathers inside a dugout shaken by distant artillery. They talk quietly about a recent fight where several PPs, 43 seconds, were taken away just days earlier. Without them, they struggled to hold their position when Soviet shock troops attacked through the fog. They describe how much slower they felt, how their own guns hesitated under pressure. The atmosphere grows heavy as they realize the rules meant to maintain order have instead created new vulnerabilities. German officers face a difficult dilemma. They want uniformity and safety, but the frontline conditions demand practicality. Some unofficially allow their men to keep captured PPS-43 seconds as long as they carry extra ammunition. Others strictly enforce regulations despite the grumbling. These inconsistent decisions spread across the front, creating patches of units with access to reliable weapons and patches without. Meanwhile, Soviet troops notice something interesting. They see Germans firing PPs 43 seconds during certain skirmishes. At first, they assume it is an isolated event. If the Germans are using Soviet guns, it means those guns have earned serious respect. Soviet commanders take pride in this, without stating it openly. Understanding that the PPS-43 has become a tool that even their enemies rely on. Despite the growing pressure from above, German soldiers continue hiding the weapons. Some smear mud on the frames to dull their shine. Others wrap them in cloth or tuck them behind crates inside dugouts. When an inspection approaches, men whisper warnings along the trench line, giving each other time to hide the banned guns. The act becomes almost instinctual, something done without thought, born purely from the need to survive the next unexpected clash. In one ruined industrial site outside Signavino, this tension reaches a breaking point. A German squad, defending a concrete building, faces a sudden Soviet push. Their commander watches in frustration as one soldier fumbles with a frozen MP-40. Another soldier, ignoring earlier orders, pulls out a hidden PPS-43 from behind, sandbags and fires rapidly, holding the entrance long enough for the squad to reposition. After the fight, the commander does not punish him. Instead, he simply nods in quiet acceptance. Rules matter, but survival matters more. Across the front, moments like this continue to unfold. Each one widens the gap between official policy and battlefield reality. German high command keeps pushing for discipline, but the PPS-43 proves itself again and again, forcing troops to choose between obedience and survival. That choice becomes increasingly difficult as battles intensify and retreat lines draw nearer. The retreat begins slowly at first, then faster with every passing week. German forces pull back from villages, forests, and river crossings as Soviet pressure grows stronger. The land they once held becomes a maze of broken defenses and snow-covered ruins. Roads turn into long tracks of frozen mud, making every movement exhausting. Soldiers carry whatever equipment they trust most, and for many, that means a captured PPS-43 hidden beneath their coats or strapped tightly across their backs. It feels like a lifeline as they move deeper into the uncertainty of retreat. German units, retreating through abandoned farm fields, experience constant harassment from Soviet patrols. Small ambushes strike from behind snowbanks or clusters of broken trees. In these moments, speed matters more than anything. Many German soldiers rely on what they know will fire instantly. The PPS-43 seconds, lightweight, lets them swing around quickly, firing short bursts before shifting position again. It feels almost natural in their hands, as if it were made for fast, instinctive use. The MP-40, though familiar, feels slower and heavier by comparison, especially when winter mud sticks to every surface. One German squad, moving through a forest path near Novgorod, senses the enemy closing in. The squad spreads out in a loose line, crouching behind tree trunks and fallen logs, Most carry their standard weapons, but two soldiers grip their captured PPS-43 seconds, ready for sudden contact. When Soviet scouts appear between the trees, the first shots ring out sharply. The PPS-43 seconds fire with a crisp rhythm, cutting through the quiet forest air. Their light frames allow quick changes of direction, helping the Germans hold their ground long enough to pull back safely. The rest of the squad takes notice. They see which weapons responded immediately and which needed extra effort. From this point on, captured PPS-43 seconds become even more common during night operations. Darkness hides their distinctive shape, but the sound of their fire becomes familiar to German ears. The troops use them during rearguard actions, moments when small groups stay behind to slow approaching Soviet forces. These missions are risky, often carried out under pressure, and require weapons that will not fail at crucial seconds. The PPS-43 proves valuable in these roles, offering quick bursts without hesitation. During a tense withdrawal across a frozen marshland, German troops attempt to cross a narrow path formed by ice and reeds. They carry their wounded and try to stay silent, hoping to avoid Soviet patrols. But the sound of distant gunfire signals approaching danger. A few soldiers prepare their MP-40 seconds. But the cold night slows the metal again. The PPS-43 carriers respond first when enemy shapes appear through the fog. Sharp bursts echo across the marsh, helping the Germans reach the far bank before the Soviets can close the distance. After crossing safely, even soldiers who once doubted captured weapons now look at the PPS-43 with increasing respect. Commanders continue issuing warnings about using enemy guns, but these warnings now feel disconnected from reality. For many units, retreat means improvising with whatever they have. Ammunition shortages worsen, and soldiers often scavenge from battlefield debris. The PPS-43 becomes a symbol of adaptation. Some troops carry 2 magazines taped together to speed up reloading. Others fashion crude slings to keep the gun steady during long marches. Despite being an enemy weapon, it blends into German units as though it were part of their standard equipment. A dramatic moment occurs during a chaotic retreat from a rail junction consumed by smoke and collapsing roofs. Flames flicker inside empty warehouses, casting long shadows across the snow. German rearguard forces try to hold back Soviet shock troops long enough for their wounded and supply wagons to escape. Their machine gun jams after firing only a short burst. Panic rises as the Soviets move closer between burning structures. 2 German soldiers step forward, both armed with PPS-43 seconds they kept hidden from earlier inspections. They fire controlled bursts that echo between the metal walls, creating just enough suppression to delay the Soviet advance. The rearguard survives the withdrawal because of those weapons. Afterward, no one questions why they had them. Stories like this spread through retreating units. Soldiers talk about how the compact Soviet guns saved them during night crossings, forest ambushes, or desperate defense lines. These stories create an almost myth-like aura around the PPS-43. It becomes the weapon soldiers hope to find in abandoned Soviet camps or fallen positions. The weapon's reputation grows, not through propaganda, but through experience repeated in the harshest conditions. As the retreat pushes closer to the borders of East Prussia, the environment becomes even harsher. Bitter wind sweeps across open fields. Snow piles against abandoned farmhouses. Troops are exhausted, hungry, and constantly on edge. In this world of collapse and uncertainty, the PPS-43 becomes a companion in survival, a tool that feels reliable when everything else breaks. The soldiers know its limitations, like the need for different ammunition, but they weigh these issues against the simple truth: the gun fires when needed. In these final critical weeks, that truth means everything. The weapon has fully earned its reputation as a tool of last chances. It has helped men survive ambushes, hold rearguard lines, and escape encirclements that might have ended differently. This growing connection between soldier and captured weapon leads directly into the final stage of the story, where the retreat reaches its end and the PPS-43 seconds legacy begins to take shape beyond the battlefield. As German forces continue retreating toward East Prussia and the Baltic coast, the front collapses into a long chain of chaotic battles, broken regroupings, and desperate defensive lines. Snow-covered fields stretch endlessly, mixed with churned mud and frozen ruins. Soldiers carry what little equipment they trust, moving through abandoned farmhouses and shattered fortifications. The winter feels heavier than before, not only because of the weather, but because the war itself has reached a stage where survival depends on instinct, quick decisions, and reliable tools. Among these tools, the captured PPS-43 remains a constant presence, still tucked under coats and slung across tired shoulders. Many German units fighting near Königsberg use the weapon openly now. Regulations feel distant, overshadowed by the urgency of every moment. Ammunition shortages intensify, forcing soldiers to scavenge for 7.62 times 25mm rounds whenever they overrun Soviet supply positions or abandon trenches. Some carry mixed pouches of ammunition, carefully separating them by touch in the dark. Even though this creates more risk, they prefer it to carrying a weapon they cannot fully trust in freezing wind or muddy trenches. The PPS-43 has proven itself across months of hardship, so its shortcomings become secondary concerns. During a defensive stand near the Pregel River, German troops take shelter inside ruined buildings with roofs half collapsed under heavy snow. They position themselves behind broken windows and shattered walls as Soviet artillery shakes the ground in steady rhythms. When the infantry assault begins, German soldiers prepare for close combat. Many clutch their captured PPS-43 seconds, knowing exactly how they will behave when the first figures appear through the drifting smoke. The weapons respond with crisp bursts, offering a sense of control in a moment filled with confusion and noise. These guns help hold the line longer than expected, delaying the inevitable advance. The soldiers understand the value of every second gained. Even as the Germans fall back from one defensive point to another, the stories surrounding the PPS-43 continue to grow. Men talk about how the weapon allowed a patrol to escape an encirclement in the forests near Tilsit, or how a single soldier used it to hold off an entire Soviet pursuit team during a nighttime withdrawal. These stories are shared in trenches, barns, and temporary shelters lit by small lanterns. The PPS-43 becomes a quiet symbol of resilience in a war where almost everything feels uncertain. It represents a moment of reliability in the middle of retreat and exhaustion. Meanwhile, Soviet troops advancing through East Prussia notice something fascinating. This sight creates a mix of emotions: amusement, pride, and a sense of victory. Soviet officers report these observations to their superiors, noting how widely the gun has been adopted by the enemy. For them, it becomes proof that the weapon they created under siege conditions has succeeded beyond its intended purpose. Not only does it support their own forces, but it influences their opponent's behavior in ways no one predicted. By the time the war nears its end, some German soldiers carrying PPS-43 seconds have traveled hundreds of kilometers with them. These weapons accompany them through forests, villages, and frozen marshes. For many, the gun becomes personal, a trusted companion that stayed reliable during nights of hunger, confusion, and fear. Its lightweight and stamped construction made it easy to carry during long retreats, and its open bolt action allowed it to function even after being dragged through mud or snow. Soldiers think about how strange it is to rely on a weapon that looks more like a machine part than a traditional firearm. Yet they also know that this strange shape saved their lives more than once. When the final battles near Berlin unfold, fewer PPS-43 seconds remain in German hands. Many have been lost during retreats, buried under rubble, or discarded when ammunition ran out. But the soldiers who used them remember the feeling clearly. They remember how it fired in storms where other weapons froze. They remember how it gave them a chance during ambushes or rearguard actions. Even if they never see the weapon again, the memory of its reliability stays with them. After the war, military researchers on both sides examine the PPS-43 carefully. They study its stamped frame, its hinge, and its simple internal parts. They recognize how its design demonstrates an important shift in small arms philosophy, one that focuses on speed, ease of production, and function over appearance. The weapon becomes a model for future designs, influencing submachine guns and compact firearms in many countries. Nations rebuilding after the war see the advantage of stamped steel, low-cost production, and minimal machining. The PPS-43 becomes part of this new trend, even though it was created under harsh wartime pressure, in museums and collections. Recovered PPS-43 seconds remain as quiet reminders of a specific moment in history. Their flat shapes and folded stocks still look strange, almost improvised, yet they carry stories within their metal frames. Stories of battles fought in forests and ruined cities. Stories of an enemy weapon becoming a lifeline for those who were never meant to use it. For German veterans who survived the Eastern Front, the memory of the PPS-43 often brings mixed feelings. Some recall it as a symbol of desperation, something they carried during the final months when everything else failed. Others remember it as a small piece of reliability in a collapsing world. They know how important it became when retreat, cold, and chaos defined their days. Time turns these memories into reflections on survival, rather than on victory or defeat. By the end of the story, the PPS-43 stands not just as a Soviet submachine gun, but as an example of how simple design can change the battlefield. It proved its worth in the worst conditions and earned quiet respect from both sides of the conflict. Its legacy extends far beyond the places where it first appeared, reaching into post-war engineering, military design, and the personal memories of those who depended on it. The weapon's journey settles into history. A stamped steel survivor, carried by soldiers who never expected to rely on it, becomes one of the small yet powerful symbols of warfare on the Eastern Front, shaped by cold, mud, retreat, and the relentless struggle to stay alive.